Hello, everybody. Good evening and welcome back. I'm Don Arleth, and you're watching World Talks here on TVP World. Anti-government protests in Slovakia continue, with tens of thousands taking to the streets in over 20 cities. Demonstrators are voicing their opposition to Prime Minister Robert Fico's pro-Russia stance. Meanwhile, Fico claims that there is a coup attempting to overthrow him. Meanwhile, the opposition is calling for a renewed vote of no confidence. With the political landscape in Slovakia becoming increasingly volatile, what's next for the country? Joining me now here on TVP World is Grigorij Meseznikov, president of the Slovak Institute for Public Affairs. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us on World Talks.
Good evening, Don. Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, now these protests taking place in over 20 cities. I just want to get a sense of how prominent they are. Are they picking up momentum as time goes on?
They're very prominent, Don, and I just would clarify that these rallies yesterday had a place in 40 cities in Slovakia. It's not only in Bratislava and all regional cities, but also in district cities. They're very prominent because they are showing how people are sensitive to some changes in governmental policies, which population consider as inappropriate. So if government is doing something which is against principles of rule of law, democracy, population is protesting. If government is admitting that Slovakia, which is member of European Union and NATO, can withdraw from these two organizations. And I mean, our membership in both NATO and EU, it's a result of very profound reform processes. And now the government, which is in charge, is admitting that in some circumstances, our country can withdraw. And just the third point, which I think is very motivating for people to go to express their opinion on the streets and the squares. Mr. Fico, Prime Minister Fico, visited at the end of December Moscow. He met with Vladimir Putin. Nobody knows now what was the content of these negotiations. This visit wasn't even announced. And for many people, it's an indication of the gradual shifting, the foreign policy orientation of the country. So all these elements are very present in the last developments. Really, they are very turbulent. I mean, political development is very turbulent. These protest rallies, the whole narrative about possible coup d'etat, which is delusional and intentional lie, and very polarizing politics and confrontation between ruling coalition and the opposition.
Yeah, we see this in places. I was in Georgia in December, and you have very similar rhetoric there. When people are out on the streets, the government automatically says that this is organized by the CEA or some kind of coup d'etat brought by the Western War Party or what have you. Now, I'd like to get your opinion about what the people of Slovakia really think. Do they see this government moving, taking concrete steps away from the European Union and closer to Russia? And is this, I would imagine this is a big problem for many Slovaks.
Well, first, of course, I mean, it's not only about foreign policy. I have to be very clear. In this area, government which was formed in October 2023 started to implement policies which were, I mean, very contradicting to the norms and rules of rule of law, democracy. So it means that population was angry at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And of course, all these policies, they are making us, I mean, how to say, not fully complying with the European Union. So we are becoming far closer to authoritarian countries. So it's one element. The second element, of course, I mean, these steps which Robert Fico conducted toward Russia and toward Ukraine, his position in Russian aggression against Ukraine is not very friendly to Ukraine. So there are two parallel lines in foreign policy to the eastward. I mean, from one side, Slovakia de facto violated the protocols which were introduced by European Union in communication with Russian leadership. So Robert Fico openly violated this protocol. He visited Moscow, he met with Vladimir Putin, who was so far isolated diplomatically and politically. And another line in this eastward Slovakia's foreign policy is that Slovakia stopped to politically support Ukraine. Now we are in quite harsh political and diplomatic escalation in the relations between us and Ukraine. And we know that Ukraine is one of our allies. It's a really close country. We are neighbors. And any weakening in the Ukrainian society, Ukrainian state means increasing the danger for us.
You mentioned during the elections that people were frustrated, people were angry. What on the domestic policy front are they upset about now? Is this mainly due, these protests, are they mainly due to this pro-Russian stance and everything Fico's been doing to get closer to Moscow? Or are there some domestic threads in here that we should know about?
Well, of course, we know that there is a list of the salient problems which people consider as very important for their definition of position and opinions to domestic politics and policies in different areas. Of course, inflation, of course, wages, of course, economic development, prices, and so on. But the trigger which really initiated this new wave of protests, it was this visit of Mr. Fico to Moscow, so the foreign policy issues. And the disagreement, this, I would say, accumulated disagreement quite visible in one of the results of opinion polls in Slovakia, which was conducted a couple of weeks ago. And according to this opinion poll, 63% of the population in representative opinion poll disagreed with the policies of government headed by Robert Fico, and only 28% people who agreed with this. So it's, I think that the very illustrative indication. Generally, governmental policies are provoking disagreement, but the trigger for these rallies, protest rallies, really it was this visit to Moscow, and of course, then a couple of days later, admittance that Slovakia can withdraw from European Union and NATO. And the main slogan of these rallies, these protest rallies, now you can see on the screen that Slovakia is Europe. It's a very strong message.
Do you think that these protests have the ability or the potential to perhaps cause a vote of no confidence, maybe snap elections, something to that effect? Are these protesters wanting a change of the guard right now? Do they want Robert Fico out?
Yeah, these protests, of course, they develop certain pressure and it influences social atmosphere, but voting of non-confidence is, I would say, the business of the parliament. Mm-hmm. It's upon opposition to propose, and then ruling coalition should accept at least the open session for such move, but several times ruling coalition simply implemented the method of boycott, obstruction. So the voting of non-confidence, I think that even if it will be conducted, it's unrealistic to expect that voting of non-confidence will be successful because opposition parties doesn't have majority of votes in the parliament. Concerning the early elections, I don't think that situation today is really developing in this direction. But today, the probability is not zero. The majority of the ruling coalition in the parliament is very tiny, just 2-3 votes. And there are some groups of dissenting MPs from the ruling parties who are generally supporting the government, but in some particular issues, they are presenting their different opinions. So opposition should now somehow combine this social pressure from these rallies, somehow to transfer this atmosphere to the political scene, and then to try to use all these arguments against the government. And I have to say that one of the demands of these rallies in the streets and squares is resignation of Prime Minister Fico. Mm-hmm. Prime Minister Fico was forced to resign in 2018 after the murder of investigative journalist Jan Kuciak and his fiancée Martina Kushnirova, but that time situation was a bit different. The rallies were similarly massive as today, but in the ruling coalition at that time, one party demanded the resignation of Robert Fico. It was smaller Slovak-Hungarian party. Today, unfortunately for the opposition and for democratic forces, there is no party inside the ruling coalition which would do the same thing, but the situation can change. I think that MPs, they are human being, they're normal person, and of course they have to feel, this pressure from the population. Robert Fico is presenting himself and creating the image of leader who is providing stable development, who cares about the country, who cares about policies. But how can you be perceived as an efficient leader if every week or every second week you can see hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating against you? And so it's a signal for other members of the ruling coalition what to do in such situation.
That's a great point, and we do see these protests taking place so frequently and every weekend. How long do you think that these protests are going to continue? And then I guess a follow-up on that would be, is there a possibility Robert Fico could go, but the coalition stays in place?
Well, it's difficult to predict them. How long these waves of massive protests will be. I expect it can be, it can last a couple of months, and it will depend how the government, how the ruling coalition will react. So far we see rather ignorance or even efforts to warn participants, even to intimidate them, not to go to the streets, that there are no reasons, allegedly, or that some provocations can have place in these rallies. Nothing like this really is happening. These rallies are very peaceful, but people are strong in demands. People presented 4 demands concerning the policies. For example, no changes in foreign policy orientation, cut the relations with Russia and return to friendly relations with Ukraine. And if government is not doing this, then the last demand is resignation of the government, resignation of prime minister. I think that people, yesterday I was in this manifestation in Bratislava, which now you are showing, and people are very peaceful. People do not want any provocations, any violence. They want to restore all democratic mechanisms, but they are very strong concerning the policies. Policies are very important now. If government will receive the signal properly, adequately, I think that then it can be, on the table, the question maybe to stop these rallies, but so far we cannot see any changes in governmental position. The question about, sustainability of the government of Robert Fico. Robert Fico definitely wants to govern, to rule this country as long as possible, but he is responsible for policies. And if policies are in contradiction with the prevailing will of the population, the responsible politicians then have to do some decision.
All right, well, we're just going to have to see just how long this keeps up and what the potential is there for change. Grigorij Meseznikov, President of the Slovak Institute for Public Affairs, thank you very much for this conversation. I very much appreciate it, and I'm very enlightened. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. It was my big pleasure. Bye.
And that concludes this edition of World Talks. Thanks for watching, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.